Between 1845 and 1872 was what was once referred to as the Māori Land Wars. It's now just known as New Zealand Land Wars, which is interesting because if you work out that period of time, it's around about 15% of how long New Zealand post-Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, has existed. So it's a really big proportion of the history of this country is made up of the New Zealand Land Wars being active, yet we don't commemorate it in any way whatsoever. We don't talk about it, we don't celebrate it, it's not a holiday. Until sort of now, the government has come out saying that they are going to put forward an idea to commemorate the New Zealand Land Wars, but they really do want to leave it up to the local councils to decide how that's going to happen, Dominic George. I think it's a good thing. I think it's an important thing for us to remember.
Absolutely. Well, I'm all for a public holiday. Let's just get that out there first and foremost. But a massively important period in New Zealand history, and one that I bet if you asked a lot of people about kids, even adults, most people, they wouldn't be able to tell you a heck of a lot about it at all. I think it's been poorly taught in schools. And I just think that we need some recognition. An absolutely key and pivotal part of this young country's history.
Yeah, and 3,000 people died in the time period, and from looking at most armed conflicts, you're normally pretty safe to assume at least double that were injured. So you could easily say up to 10,000 people were affected by this. 15% of the history of our country has been involved with this war of the time period. It needs to be commemorated. Once it finished in 1863, the government then said, you naughty Māori, you've been rebelling against us, we're going to take some more of your land off you, which of course is still being decided to this day in the courts and stuff. So yeah, it does need to be looked at. Let's have a look at exactly what the politicians have said, because I wanted to make some things really clear. The first is they're not going to be imposed, these celebrations, commemorations, by central government. Bill English said this: I think it will almost certainly be locally led rather than government led. Government provides some resources, but this has to be something that people want to own, not something that is pushed on them. John Key also stressed very clearly, and unfortunately I'm sorry to tell you this, Dom, that a public day off would not be what they're pushing, just a commemoration day. He said this: we are not proposing that would be a separate public holiday, but we are saying that it is likely there might be an agreement at some point that a commemoration date can be set. So they're saying let's think about it and let's look at how we're going to celebrate it, but let's leave it up to the local authorities. I do just want to address one thing. Tim, we're going to go to Q17 here, jumping one of Andrew Little's here, because you said something really interesting, which was kids don't know about it. Andrew Little grew up in Taranaki, right? We all know that Parihaka is in Taranaki. Listen to what Andrew Little said about the land wars when he came from Taranaki and why he thinks commemorating it is a good idea. Check this out. Quote, I know when I was at school, I didn't learn a great deal about it, meaning the land wars. I learned more about those issues and certainly about Parihaka in Taranaki after I left school, and in fact after I left Taranaki. I just think we can do better at coming to terms with our history, including parts of our history that perhaps many of us are a little embarrassed by. We shouldn't be embarrassed by it. We should accept that it has happened in the past, and we should learn from it and embrace what we have now, which is a set of legal arrangements that ensure that a Treaty of Waitangi is starting to now to be observed, not only in the law but in the spirit as well. So he's from Taranaki, gave me another great quote that I fumbled over there like last week, and he's saying I didn't know that much about it until I left, so that echoes those points.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and I just think I remember history at high school, for example, and I majored in history at university, and you see what happens there is we would study, you know, certain countries, certain eras, certain time periods, certain events. Very few of them were New Zealand based. It may have changed, I'm sure it has a little bit now, but what that does is that piques your interest in other places. So by the time and other subjects, when you go to university, you're not inclined to study maybe New Zealand history so much because your interest has been piqued in, say, I don't know, United States history or Irish history or the Vietnam War or things like that, you know. So I think that it's got a real knock-on effect, and I think that the other thing about it is it's not a dull subject to talk about in terms of storytelling. There's some magnificent stories with the land wars, brutal stories, tragic stories, but they're good stories, and they probably deserve a bit more airing than they've had up to this point.
And if Government gets behind it, which they're kind of semi-getting behind it or saying they might. Then, of course, local bodies get behind it. Then, of course, it becomes public knowledge, general knowledge. Then it flows into the classroom more easily than it currently is. So, I mean, win-win-win.
It's a win-win.